Imagine going through one of the hardest times of your life, a major surgery that leaves you weak and vulnerable, relying on others for support. But instead of your parents being there for you, when you need them the most, they refuse to even visit. Alone in a sterile hospital room, feeling abandoned and betrayed. That was me. I thought my parents were my rock, the ones who would always have my back. But when I woke up in that recovery room, they were nowhere to be found. What would you do if your parents told you they wouldn't visit you after surgery? What if they didn't even try to reach out, leaving you in the hardest moment of your life without any support? That's exactly what happened to me. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all started when I had to go in for a major surgery. Nothing life-threatening, but it required a long recovery process, the kind of thing that makes you feel helpless. But I was used to my parents being there for me. They'd always been supportive. But when I called them after the surgery, the response I got left me in shock. "We can't come to visit you," they said. "It's too much for us." And just like that, they shut me out. I spent the next few weeks in that hospital room alone, with only the beeping of machines and the distant sounds of other patients for company. Days blurred together as I tried to heal, but it wasn't just my body that needed healing. My heart was breaking. Why weren't they there for me? Didn't I deserve that support, especially after all I'd done for them? But as time went on, something unexpected happened. A stranger, a woman named Sarah, became the support I didn't even know I needed. She was an older woman, recovering from her own surgery, and despite our age difference, we bonded in a way I never imagined. She shared her stories, her wisdom, and somehow, in that cold hospital room, she made me feel like I wasn't alone. It wasn't until later, after weeks of recovery, that I realized Sarah had become the family I never had during that time. But what about my actual family? What would happen when they showed up years later at my graduation? The day they arrived was a turning point, one that would change everything. It's crazy how fast everything can change. One minute you think you have everything figured out, and the next your whole world is upside down. After my surgery, I tried to keep myself busy. I focused on getting better, pushing through the pain and ignoring the empty feeling in my chest. But no matter how many books I read or how many TV shows I binge-watched to pass the time, there was always that nagging question. Why wouldn't my parents visit me? Every time I called them, they had an excuse. "We're busy. We don't want to disturb you. It's better if you focus on healing." But all I could think about was how, as my body slowly healed, my relationship with them was falling apart. I started feeling like they were no longer my parents. If they couldn't show up for me during the hardest time in my life, what did that say about our relationship? Sarah, the woman in the bed across from mine, noticed. She had been through her own battles in life, but she didn't let it stop her from reaching out to someone who was struggling. We spent hours talking, not just about surgeries and recovery, but about life. Sarah had this calm energy, and the way she talked about forgiveness and moving forward made me question everything. Sometimes we get so wrapped up in our pain, we forget the healing power of understanding, she said one afternoon as we sipped on hospital tea. Her words struck me. Could I forgive my parents, even though they had hurt me so badly? But even as I started to find a way forward, I kept wondering if I could ever really forgive them. They had refused to even show up, something as simple as that. A hospital visit, they had made it clear. I was on my own. And Sarah, a stranger, had stepped in when my own parents couldn't. A week passed, and I finally decided to confront them. I called my mum, nervously trying to hold back tears. I needed to understand why they hadn't been there. What had happened? What could possibly be more important than your own child in pain? But when my mum answered, her voice sounded different. She hesitated before saying, "We didn't know how to handle it. We were scared. We thought we might make things worse." What did that even mean? Were they really scared? Or was there something deeper going on? As I hung up the phone, I was left with more questions than answers. Scared? What kind of excuse was that? I tried to process it, but the hurt was still fresh. My parents, the people who should have been there for me, had let me down in a way I couldn't even begin to comprehend. If they truly cared, why hadn't they fought to be by my side during such a vulnerable time? Sarah could see the storm inside me. "It's not about you, Ella," she said one afternoon as we sat in the hospital garden, the sun casting long shadows on the ground. "People react to pain in different ways. Maybe they couldn't handle it, but that doesn't mean they don't love you." I wanted to believe her, but the hurt felt so much stronger than the words. My mum had apologised over the phone, but that didn't undo what happened. It didn't change the fact that I spent weeks in that hospital bed, feeling like I didn't matter. I had to ask myself, could I ever forgive them? Could I even allow them back into my life after what they had done? As time passed, I decided I needed space. I needed to focus on healing, physically and emotionally. I couldn't let my parents' neglect control my recovery. I poured my energy into my studies and made new friends, all while growing closer to Sarah, who had become my rock. She'd had her own struggles, but she never let her past define her. I admired that strength. And slowly, I started to realise that I didn't need my parents to validate me. Sarah's presence reminded me that family isn't just about blood. It's about who chooses to stand by you, even when things get tough. Then, one day, I received a message from my mum. She said she wanted to visit. I felt a rush of emotions: anger, confusion, relief, but most of all, I felt exhausted. They were coming. But after all these months, was it too late for us? Would I ever truly be able to forgive them? Graduation day was approaching, and with it came a whirlwind of emotions. I'd worked so hard to get here, to reach this milestone on my own, without the support I thought I needed. But as the day grew nearer, I couldn't escape the tension that had been simmering between my parents and me for years. Was I really ready to face them after everything that had happened? I had made peace with my situation, or so I thought. I knew I'd be walking across that stage alone, with my friends and mentors cheering me on. I'd come to terms with the fact that my parents might never be a part of this chapter in my life. I had moved on, at least emotionally. But the morning of my graduation, just as I was getting ready, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mum. "We're here. We're at the ceremony." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't prepared for this. After everything, all the hurt, all the years without them, they were showing up now? Why now? I tried to push the thoughts aside, but my mind kept racing. What would I say to them? What would I do when I saw them again? After all the pain, would I be able to just forgive and let go? When I arrived at the ceremony, I tried to block out the thoughts of my parents being in the audience. I focused on the steps ahead of me, on walking across that stage with my head held high. But as I walked to the stage, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. As I glanced out into the crowd, my eyes locked onto them. my mum and dad, sitting silently in the back, their faces barely visible in the sea of graduates and families. A part of me wanted to ignore them, to pretend they weren't there. But another part of me was overwhelmed with a flood of emotions: anger, confusion, and, oddly enough, a tinge of hope. As I stood on stage about to give my speech, I had to decide. Should I confront them right here, in front of everyone? Or should I let them stay in the back, as distant as they had been in my life for years? The moment felt like an eternity. As I stood there on that stage, the weight of the last few years hung heavy on my shoulders. My parents were watching me. They had shown up. But was that enough? Was I supposed to just let go of everything that had happened, all the pain they had caused, and forgive them just because they were physically present? I took a deep breath before I started my speech. I had worked so hard to get to this point, and this moment was about me, not them. But even as I tried to focus on the words I had rehearsed, I couldn't help but feel a sting every time I glanced at them. I hadn't prepared myself for this moment, for the flood of unresolved emotions that came rushing back. My mind was spinning. Should I say something to them? Should I confront them now? Or should I just keep my distance and pretend I hadn't seen them? I finished my speech trying to maintain composure, but my heart was racing. When I walked off the stage, I found myself face to face with my mum and dad. Their faces were filled with mixed emotions: regret, longing, and maybe even a little fear. They apologised again, their voices shaky. "We're so sorry, Ella. We should have been there for you. We were scared, but that was no excuse. Can you ever forgive us?" For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally hearing the apology I had longed for. But as I looked at them, I realised something. Their apology didn't change the past. They had abandoned me when I needed them the most. They couldn't just show up and expect everything to be okay because they finally recognised their mistake. I had spent years healing on my own, with people who truly cared about me. Like Sarah, who had been my real family. I told them the truth. "I'm glad you're here, but it doesn't change the years you missed. I've forgiven you, but that doesn't mean things can go back to how they were. You can't just show up and expect me to forget." The relief of finally speaking my truth was overwhelming. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't going to let them dictate how I moved forward. I had learned to rely on myself and the people who truly cared. My parents seemed devastated, but they understood. They had tried, but they couldn't erase the past. It would take time for us to rebuild our relationship, if that was even possible. But I wasn't holding on to hope that things would magically get better. I had learned that healing comes from within, and I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. As I walked away from them, I felt lighter. I had made peace with the past. I was no longer the little girl who needed her parents' validation. I was an adult, standing tall, proud of how far I'd come. My graduation wasn't just a celebration of academic success. It was a victory over everything I'd been through. With Sarah by my side, I knew I had the support I needed. I didn't need to look back anymore. I had finally moved on, ready to face whatever came next.